The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
I was really close to starting this podcast by quoting that god-awful commercial from, how many years ago was that? Guess what day it is? Mike. You remember that commercial, don't you? I'm not alone here. Don't you, Neil? You remember that thing?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
No, really? I think it might have been Geico. I think it was an insurance commercial where a camel was walking through like a bullpen, not a baseball bullpen, like an office bullpen, cubicles, and yelling at everybody to answer the question what day it is, trying to get them, obviously, to say hump day. It was actually really funny one time, and then it was incredibly obnoxious every other time. You never saw that commercial? Come on.
I now that you're bringing it back, I remember that. Well, actually, I tried to block that out of my mind, but
yeah.
It's coming back. Thank you.
It's back. You're welcome. It's Wednesday. It's Fantasy NBA Today. Dan Besbris, Neil Rochlani. This is, of course, a hoop ball presentation. And as I always do at the start of these podcasts, reminding everybody, you can follow all of us. Me, Neil, the website, this ethereal being that carts our fantasy information from us to you. At Dan Besbris, at Ball with Neil, that's Neil, by the way, and at Hoop Ball Fantasy. Neil, how you been, my man? I haven't talked to you in a few days. I know that it's weird, and everybody's like, why do you guys need platitudes at the beginning of the show? But we only get to do one show a week together, so I like to say hi.
Hello.
It's the Uncle Leo moment of our podcast. Hello,
Exactly.
Jerry.
Last time I couldn't do the show with you, I believe, because of the Comcast issue.
Oh, yeah,
I had,
2 weeks.
Internet issues. And the next day I went in and got a new modem, and things went very smoothly with Adrian. And hopefully tonight we're going to be good. This NBA news just keeps on trucking along, huh?
Yes,
Or
it
trucking
does.
along.
What are you talking about, Neil? What could have possibly happened on Tuesday?
I know.
Lead us in. What's our big story of the day? I assume you're talking about
it. Now the center point of Cleveland for the next 4 years.
Oh, that's what you were talking about? I really thought you wanted to do the Carmelo Anthony rehash. Okay, that's fine. I guess.
No.
I'm kidding.
That's another big name.
I'm completely kidding.
Oh,
I am 180% kidding. There actually was one other piece of news, and it had to do with Danny Green's groin. So, you want to flip a coin? Do you want to talk about Danny Green's groin or Kevin Love's contract? It's either way. It's great alliterative action.
You know what? Can you handle Danny Green's groin?
Can anybody? I feel like, okay, come on. I'm going to put in a call to Brew at the end of this show, and I'm going to see if he can make a hoop ball Danny Green's groin t-shirt. Can you handle Danny Green's groin? Hashtag hoop ball. Neil, I think you've started something beautiful. Danny Green's groin. I mean, okay, so I think we can cover this relatively briefly because this feels like a story that's really more about Kawhi Leonard than it is about Danny Green, right? When you saw that story, you were like, oh.
Yeah.
I'm
actually looking at the story right now. I'm sorry. I'm not prepped well.
So Danny Green apparently unknowingly played most of last year with a torn groin, which of course, suddenly this story comes out from one of the two guys traded away from San Antonio. Yes, it was the time when everybody was taking physicals and so forth, but come on, you don't think that leaked as a way for Kawhi Leonard to say, you see what I'm talking about here? Like, the Spurs cleared me to play. My doctor said no. The Spurs also cleared Danny Green to play, and apparently, his left leg wasn't attached to the middle part of his body because he had a torn. I actually didn't see if it was a ligament or a tendon. I didn't read that part of it. But something was torn in your groin, and that's painful. I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah, so you think this is Danny Green basically sticking up for Kawhi?
Yes, I do.
Making the story.
Yes,
yeah,
I do.
That makes perfect sense. I saw Kawhi pass his physical, though, so I don't think there's going to be any issue in terms of him sitting, right? For Toronto, you don't see it going that way, right?
So I don't know one thing when it comes to that physical. This is one of those areas where somebody's just going to know more than us. When a player passes his physical, Do you know if that means he's 100% healthy or if whatever they find, the receiving team just doesn't care? I think it's the latter. I think that the Raptors could have found almost anything, and as long as they're like, okay, fine, we know about it, we're okay with it, then they can say he passed his physical. So I don't know if this means he's 100% healthy. It just means that the Raptors are okay with whatever's wrong with him. I think that's the case, though. I don't know. Do you know if that's the correct answer?
I do not, but my understanding is that it's only information they received that they did not know ahead of time from the team they traded from.
Right.
Is what I'm thinking. So as long as if there was something that they found out that they already knew about, then yes, he would probably still pass.
You think Danny Green's going to play in Toronto? I mean, he's decent.
Yeah, no, I thought he was going to really help that team defensively. I thought he would be a great player for that system. Now that I'm reading the story, I'm worried. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you sort of have to write him
sorry.
off. His lack of consistency has been unnerving for many, many years in a row now. And with Toronto, there's this thought that like they had PJ Tucker for a short stretch, and they had DeMare Carroll, and they kept trying to find the right 3-and-D guy. And I think it's supposed to be OG Anunoby now, but Danny Green could it seems like he could fill a similar role. I don't think I'm drafting him in any format, though.
Yeah, we'll see where he comes in the preseason, if he's playing at all. I mean, if you're drafting in the summertime, for sure, leave him alone. OG, though, is more D than 3, unfortunately, right now.
Yeah.
We'll see how that changes this year. I imagine he's going to take a step forward with the usage and shooting, but I was really impressed with him as a real player. Fantasy-wise, he's still not on my board, though.
Does this change the way you look at Kawhi Leonard at all? Do you think he's healthy now?
I do. I think he's healthy. Well, I think he's healthy. He's going to be fine to play. Otherwise, I don't think Toronto would trade for him.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
They had to have some inside information. Not inside, but I mean, they had to have some assurance from someone in his camp that he could play. I don't think they would make that trade otherwise. Unless I'm very naive about how this all works.
So Adrian and I know, have had conversations about the injury thing. I consider myself actually a fairly conservative fantasy player, but there are certain scenarios where I'm like, look, if somebody's going to be undervalued by X amount, I'd be a fool not to do something about it. I'm considering Kawhi Leonard this year. Obviously, it depends on where he ends up getting drafted. But as I said on a recent podcast, if he plays 65 games, he could still be a top 20 guy with his stat set. I think he's going to play 65 games this year. What do you think?
Yeah, I think he's in a situation where he has to prove himself on the court if he wants that big contract. So I think he's going to have to go out there and play well and show that he's committed. So I think he's going to – the injury is the risk, but you're right. He's still a first-round talent in terms of fantasy value. And if all the reports coming into the season is that he's healthy enough to start and play those 30-plus minutes, I would expect him to be, I don't know. I'm trying to find his stats from 2016-17.
They were quite good.
Well, that's very qualitative of you.
Yeah.
Yes, no, he's someone, if he fell to the second round, I would take him. I think I still might avoid him at the back end of the first round because of uncertainty, but I would have no problem taking him in the second round, assuming that there's no issues going into the preseason that we, into my draft. As I tend to draft like in leagues that are right before the season starts. So I usually have a fair amount of preseason knowledge.
As you should.
How rotations are looking, so I don't like to draft before then.
It kind of, the Kawhi Leonard thing, I have this weird feeling he's going to end up getting drafted in that Jimmy Butler area from this year, like 16 to 20, and that makes me super nervous because I would love to get him at 20. But if I have the 18th pick and Kawhi Leonard is on the board, I don't know how I could not take him. And then there's the possibility there that I end up with a goose egg out of my middle second round pick. And you almost can't come back from that. I'm going to have to talk myself back, and I'm definitely going to be going back and forth on this one. I want to take him. I feel like it's going to have to be at the end of the second round for me, where, if it's a miss, then it's one that doesn't sting quite as much because I had a beginning of the first round kind of pick. Like if I get Anthony Davis in the first round, and by the way, to folks out there, we have a couple more topics on today's pod, and a lot of them are going to revolve around injury discussion. If I have Anthony Davis in the first round, I had like the second pick, and I got AD, 12-team league, and I have the 23rd pick coming back, and Kawhi Leonard's on the board, I'm probably taking him, and I'm not that worried because I'd feel so confident that Anthony Davis was going to carry me with that first round. And if he falls apart, then whatever. Season's lost anyway. I might as well just go full dice roll at that point. But if I've got like, I don't know, end of a first-round guy like a Damian Lillard, I don't think I could go with Kawhi in round 2. I think at that point you're like, okay, I got to take a guy that I know is going to play 75 games. He's going to be, at worst, like an early third-round value, and maybe he plays himself to middle second round, upper second round. You got to be a little bit safer there. I think that there's really kind of perfect places where you could end up with Kawhi Leonard, and at the same time, I kind of don't want to have to make that call because I'm going to end up kicking myself either way.
What would be your hesitancy to take him if he is healthy and seems like he's going to really contribute to that team?
He's a
like,
wild card.
What is your concern?
He's a wild card, right?
He was only a wild card this last season in this San Antonio, right? Other than that, he was pretty much a known quantity.
Yeah, it's a pretty weird quad injury, though. We still don't really know anything about it.
Yeah, exactly. We don't know anything about it. I mean, like I said, I'd have to see him play in the preseason and hear from his whole camp, but he's fine.
But if he fell to like 22, how could you not take him there? You have
I'm looking
to.
at his, I'm sorry, can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah, I wish you would.
And I will, sir. I'm looking at Basketball Monster, and so in the prior season when he played, he was 8th overall, but his value was more than double the 22nd overall player.
Yeah.
So you're basically, if you take him, you're getting a huge steal anywhere after, assuming he plays to his ability, anywhere or near that, anywhere after like 18, 19, 20. It's ridiculous.
He's got to fall a little bit, right? I mean, and some of it's going to come down to whatever kind of league that you, the listener, are in. You're going to know the other people you're playing against better than Neil and I do. And I know that there's one league of mine where he'll almost definitely go relatively early. And there's probably one league of mine where he might not get drafted until like the 4th round because someone's going to be in a full-blown panic. And you sort of have to adjust accordingly. But yeah, like you said, Neil, you kind of have to at a certain point. 25.5 points, 5 boards, 3.5 assists, almost 2 steals, 0.7 blocks, 2 threes on 48.5% shooting. He's a near 90% free throw shooter when he's actually locked in and playing big minutes these days. I mean, he's like sort of mini Kevin Durant from a fantasy perspective with more steals and fewer blocks, where he's just good at everything and he doesn't hurt you anywhere. If you're getting a guy that if he's even like 80% healthy, he's a first-round guy, you kind of have to do it. And so with that, I want to transition to topic number 2, and we're going to bury the lead, by the way. We're going to talk about Kevin Love last. Topic number 2 is Anthony Davis, because that ended up being, I think, the most controversial thing that Adrian and I talked about on yesterday's podcast, which is that he feels like he's just the easy choice for number 1. And you shouldn't feel like number 1 is an easy pick. That's a terrible feeling for me. I love Anthony Davis, and I will take him number 1 if I have that pick. But I kind of wish there was a little bit more uncertainty because it feels like it's just ripe to fall apart.
Well, I will also make the argument that last year in 8-cat, it wasn't a clear-cut number 1. I mean, I know after DeMarcus went down, Anthony Davis was clearly number 1. But overall for the season, he and Harden were neck and neck in 8-cat. So there's still the case for Harden. I'm also with you. Like, this might just go against what I said with Kawhi, but I don't like to take guys with injury risk in the first couple of rounds. Kawhi, I'm only going to consider an injury risk if he's not coming into the season fully healthy. If he's coming in fully healthy, I don't consider him an injury risk anymore. Anthony Davis is someone, I know you talked about him a few times on the show, talking about how you don't think he was playing some of the times because they wanted to hold him out, not necessarily because he was really, injured, quote unquote. So, and you think he's going to play a little more when he's nicked up this season. I'm nervous about him. I don't think I would take him with the first overall pick. I would probably go with an 8-cat to Harden.
In a 9-cat, they're not even in the same ballpark. So that does create two kind of different. Those are definitely two very clear and different discussion points. I have to assume that 8-cat, there's the first round is pretty different in 8-cat because you give these massive bumps to guys like Harden, LeBron this last year averaged a ton of turnovers. He was at 4.2. Giannis had 3. Boogie had 5. Those guys get colossal bumps. In 9-cat, on a per-game ranking actually this year, Steph Curry ended up as number 2, and obviously he missed 30 games, so totals he wasn't close to those guys. I know it's a different discussion, but I actually really like Steph Curry this year as someone that people are going to forget about and could coast into the number 2 spot if he just doesn't have the same weird stuff over and over again in kind of an anomaly season. I saw Adrian and our good buddy Eric Ong on Twitter on Tuesday evening discussing the Anthony Davis versus James Harden thing, and it seemed like Twitter was fairly AD leaning, and that surprised me, actually. I thought people would be a bit more afraid because of how much time he spends in the locker room, and maybe it was just because it was more hoop ballers than not, where we sort of push Anthony Davis harder than other websites, but I thought Harden would get more love. Maybe it was just a bunch of 9-cat guys. I don't know. Surprised me.
Well, I think it's the Dan Besbris effect.
Hardly.
What? You've been hyping this guy.
I have.
You not?
I have, but I hyped Thad Young, and he still went number 130 in every league.
No, but you're hyping him for a very good reason. I do think an 8-cat's a little more. There's more discussion. I did not see the Twitter discussion between Eric Ong and Adrian Benjamins, but I will say if Anthony Davis fell to maybe like 3rd, I would take him.
You're talking 8-cat.
8-cat, of course. Yeah, 9-cat, I would take him 1.
Yeah, you're a much better source on 8-cat than I am. I think most folks know I tend to gravitate towards the leagues with turnovers counting. I'm not that afraid of Anthony Davis and all the injuries, but the more that I see people loving on him, the more I think, this is going to blow up in my face. So I still believe AD is your guy in 9-cat. He was, as I've said before, 30% more valuable than the number 2 player in 9 category formats, which on a per-game basis was Steph, and on a totals basis was Karl Anthony Towns, and neither one of them was even in the same stratosphere. And there's no reason why AD can't basically do what he did before and do it again this season. But the main topic on today's podcast is, and you said it earlier on, Kevin Love, who re-signed with Cleveland for the next quarter century, it seems like, in a, kind of a move that surprised a lot of us because we had heard he might be on the trade block. Was on an expiring deal for, I think, about $25 million, and then got himself a whopper of an extension, and now he's signed with the Cavs for 5 seasons coming up. I think a total of about $145 million. It sort of changes the story on him, doesn't it? One of the reasons to avoid Kevin Love going into this year was the fact that he might get shipped off to a place where he wasn't going to be a feature guy, but he's the core dude in Cleveland now.
Absolutely. He looks like the centerpiece of the team going forward, and I think he's really happy with it. I didn't know if he'd want to stick around Cleveland, once LeBron left, but it seems like he is going to still be there. And I'm looking at his stats from last year, only 28 minutes per game, unless there's something wrong with Basketball Monster, which seems low. I've always avoided him, mainly because I know he's not technically a big man. He is a stretch 4, but he gets so few blocks. And it's so hard to get. If you're going to start like 3 or 4 big men total, and I like to have it's hard to like, maybe I can make a little sense. Big men, I don't like to start a lot of big men on my team. And so I want each one to be a pretty good blocker. And so with Love not being able to contribute in that category, he tends to be a guy I avoid. I think this could change a bit. I don't know much about his health going into this season, and so I'll have to research that. But I think he'll get a lot more minutes. So, which means last year he finished 38 in ACAT. I would imagine he finishes somewhere closer to 30 is my guess.
I think he could even go higher than that. So let me read a number that I tweeted when this contract got signed, and that is the last season for Kevin Love in Minnesota, which is going to be a lot like the guys around him here in Cleveland when he's the main dude and he's not splitting touches with, well, LeBron. Kevin Love's final year with the Timberwolves, he played 77 games, averaged 26 points, 12.5 rebounds, 4.5 assists, 0.8 steals, half a block, like you said, doesn't block shots, 2.5 rebounds on a fairly respectable, actually, 45.7% from the field, which isn't great for a center, but for a guy taking 7 threes a game, that's not a soul-crushing number. And a high-volume 82% at the free throw line, a number that he's actually improved upon over the last couple of seasons. There is a weird universe, and I don't know about 36 minutes, though. That does feel a bit on the high side in the modern NBA. But there's a universe where he starts to get close to those kinds of opportunities again. And he was a first-round guy that year. His first season in Cleveland, he was one of those dudes that just destroyed people's fantasy teams because everybody was watching him come off a first-round year. They applied sort of the Chris Bosh factor to him, and his was worse. It impacted Kevin Love more than basically anyone else, and it was only now over the last 2 seasons where he kind of found a little bit of a groove in Cleveland only to end up getting hurt. My reticence with Kevin Love is the injury bug. He's had basically 5 seasons of a 10-year NBA career where he was healthy and 5 seasons where he wasn't. That's not a very good average. By the way, for those of you who didn't have their calculators handy, that's 50% of the time. He played 59 games last year. He played 60 the year before. So it's been 3 seasons since his last 77-game effort. First 2 years with Cleveland, by the way, he was relatively durable. However, it's that same kind of Kawhi Leonard-gian number here, where if you've got a guy who's putting up, I guess he would be more towards the late end of the first round. Late end of the first round, 65 to 70 games, that's still like an end of second round kind of value on the year. The question is, how much do you trust him? Neil, would you even draft Kevin Love? Is there any spot he would fall to where you'd pick him up?
I would not draft him in the first. Well, certainly not in the second round. Probably not the third round either. When he did sign the extension, the first thing that went to my mind was trying to look at his numbers from Minnesota, and I just don't know if that is reasonable given how much time has passed and the injuries he sustained. So I do not see him getting top 20 value. I don't even think he can get. I think he's going to be more like 30, and so. Maybe fourth round, but I don't see how he lasts that long in most drafts because he's going to be ranked, I think, much higher.
I think I would take him in the third round.
Okay.
Second round is
what spot would you take? Would you take him in? I'm assuming like somewhere you're in like 12-team leagues, right? Is that what you're thinking?
I'm a 12-team kind of guy. But it's vague to say what round you take a guy in. I think maybe that's something we should work towards avoiding on this show altogether. I think I would take him if he fell past pick 30.
Okay, and you think his value could be as high as 15?
I think it could be higher.
Really? Wow.
If he has, like his last season in Minnesota, with 77 games at that production, he was a single digits guy. You got to go way back. You got to turn the clock back farther than most websites cover. But he was in the single digits. He was number 6 that year in 9-category format. He was, Sherman, let's jump in the Wayback Machine here. Kevin Love, Anthony Davis, Chris Paul, Steph Curry, LeBron James, Kevin Love. That was your top 6. By the way, big-time brownie points, Neil, if you can guess who number 7 was in that 2013-2014 year. It will boggle your mind. 2013,
2014. It wasn't point guard. Was it point guard?
Nope. It was.
Okay, never mind.
It was the last guy we're actually going to talk about on today's podcast.
Oh my God, Carmelo Anthony.
Carmelo Anthony was number 7.
Oh my
Carmelo
gosh.
Anthony was the number 7 player that year. Listen to the top 12. I mean, this is like how far things have come. Kevin Love was number 6. Melo was 7. Harden was 8. This was when things were just starting to get warmed up in Houston for him. Dirk Nowitzki was number 9 that year. Serge Ibaka was number 10. He averaged almost 3 blocks a game that season. Paul George, 11, and Brook Lopez was number 12. That was your first round. The highlight, by the way, of the second round was Ryan Anderson's 22-game season where he was putting up 20 points and almost 7 rebounds a game. But we get sidetracked by the funny nuances of seasons gone by. The real point there is, I mean, Kevin Love, that's middle of the first round stuff on a per-game basis, and at 77 games, because he played more games than 2 of the guys in front of him, he actually was the number 4 fantasy player that year. So, I mean, we're talking about a guy where, like I said before, middle of the first round, if you get 65 games out of a dude, you're talking about an easy second-round value. It's crazy, though, isn't it?
Well, this extrapolation back to the past is what concerns me. I mean, do you really think he's a player he was back then? Do you think there's any been drop-off in his athleticism?
I think he
game?
could be.
I know his shooting is fine. His free throw percentage is very solid. He still rebounds incredibly well. I'm trying to think what other statistics he must have put up.
He was never athletic.
Last year was 17. Do you think you see him to get back to wasn't he scoring like 25 plus a game?
Yeah, 26 that year.
Yeah, so you see, but I just don't see that happening again.
I see him getting into the 20s easily.
All right.
I mean, he was at 19 last year. Not even this most recent season. He was at 19. Kyrie was still on the team then. 20 is very reachable. Dude's not even 30 years old yet, although he will be before the season starts. Okay, so I don't think he's going to be the number 6 fantasy player this year. So I hope that's clear. All I'm saying is that at his peak, he was number 4. And that's something that I think a lot of people have forgotten. You might even remember, oh yeah, I feel like he may have been a first-round pick. He was a high first-round pick back in his time with Minnesota. And so if you're getting like 90% of that, you're still talking about a first-round guy. You shave off 10% of his numbers there. You move him from 6 to like 9. So if you're getting him in the third round, again, even if he misses games, that's still basically an overperformance from his draft position. And I can't believe there's this many guys that I'm looking at on the board who are bona fide injury risks. And I'm thinking, God, I feel like I kind of have to take them. Almost all the guys I'm targeting. Anthony Davis, if he's not there, Steph Curry, early on, Kawhi, Kevin Love. All these guys to me are going to be, except with the exception of AD, are going to be undervalued this coming year. And if you get an undervalued player in the first couple of rounds, you almost guarantee yourself a top 4 finish in your league. It's that simple.
Well, yeah, I just went back into the math really quickly. So I was thinking he's going to be more like, you said 90% of his value, potentially, right, of what he did in Minnesota. If he got 2/3 of his value, he would be like 17 in last year's stats.
That's pretty crazy, isn't it?
I know. So I guess I am giving him not enough credit. He's probably going to be more.
Don't let me crack you
that
that
easy. I think you're right. I think there is potential for second round value.
Yeah, fight me on this, man. Don't let me crack you that fast.
No, you're not. But I'm trying to do the numbers, and I think 2/3 of what he did in Minnesota is possible. That's what I would target.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
you take
like mid-second round.
I think he could do better than that.
I know you. I know you said 90%, which
90 is
I
the
think
high
that's
side.
nuts. But go ahead.
Yeah,
I'll let you do.
Could we like split the difference and go with like 79%, 78, 70, somewhere in that negative? Sure. That's pretty good. That's first round numbers.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's end of first round numbers right there. If he does 79.4%.
So here's the caveat to this, and VP, our guy on Twitter, pointed it out, and it is worth mentioning on this podcast. Basically, all of the things that we're discussing right now are based on, for me, a 9 category, and for Eric, an 8 category roto format. If you're in a head-to-head league, I don't know that I can advocate drafting Kevin Love because the Cavs are probably not going to be playing for anything at the end of this year. I mean, I don't think they're making the playoffs without LeBron. I know the East stinks, but they're not that bad. So there's a very real possibility that he doesn't play from late March to the end of the regular season, and that could crush you. But in a roto format, if he misses 5 or 6 games at the end of the year, it doesn't matter where he misses the games. It's all about the totals that he's accumulating. By the way, it's why roto is so much better. But, all of these injury guys, with perhaps the exclusion of a dude like Anthony Davis, who's going to be playing for playoff seeding, you probably have to think twice in a head-to-head format. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I normally play rotisserie. So head-to-head changes a lot of things. I just did my first year last year in head-to-head, so I'm still trying to figure that out. But for sure, you don't want guys who are going to be resting at the end. Otherwise, your team just falls apart.
All right, we'll come back to you, Neil. We'll do a Kevin Love in review, and maybe I'll have you and Adrian can talk about it. You guys are together tomorrow on this pod, right?
Yes.
Yeah. All right, so
yeah,
you'll get Neil's.
Throw off your whole schedule, so thank you for that.
That's fine. I did it. I went out of town for a week. Adrian's going camping this weekend, by the way. We're moving some bodies around. So Adrian and Neil will be on tomorrow's pod. You'll have me solo on Friday. We're not yet done with this show, however. Neil, we're going to get you back on tomorrow's pod with Adrian. You'll tell everybody where you like Kevin Love. I'm saying it again. If he falls to 30, I would take him in a heartbeat. I don't think he falls that far. I would even consider taking him earlier in the 3rd round, but I don't think you can take that big of a risk with a 2nd-round pick where the reward is not perhaps quite as high as someone like Kawhi Leonard, who is still playing for $200 million, where Kevin Love basically just got his. So the last thing I want to talk about, Neil, before we wrap this thing up is Melo, because I spent half a show on Monday talking about the fact that, in a better situation, which he now finds himself, there's a weird universe where he could have some value. And I don't mean, obviously, 2013, 2014 first-round pick Melo. But there's something to it, right? Like, he could get inside the top 100, couldn't he?
That was my initial thought. Started looking at the numbers, and I'm actually going to go against that. He played 32 minutes a game last year, and he was 131 in ACAT. I don't see him playing 32 minutes, anything more than 32 minutes. I know he might get more open looks this year, and he might. A big thing that killed him last year was his field goal percentage, which was 40%. So that may come up if he's getting more open looks, but I still don't. I think he is really on the physical decline. So and he played 78 games last year. I don't think he. I was going to say I might take him in my last round flyer, but I'm not even sure I would do that at this point.
I guess there's an edge in a 9-cat format for him, right? Because his turnovers were really low playing along.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and they should be again. I think last round flyer in a 9-cat format does make sense. I could see where in an 8-cat it's like, well, what's the upside here? There's no upshot. He's not turning the ball over, but that doesn't help me, and this other stuff is kind of clunky. It does seem like his field goal percentage should improve now, actually getting looks in a decent offensive scheme. That's what I'm looking at and thinking, maybe there's a little wiggle room here. The problem is, and this is where you and I do agree on Melo perfectly, there just isn't really much upside there. He's playing behind Chris Paul and James Harden, so even if things kind of broke the right way, the boost for him would be in field goal percent and pretty much nothing else.
Yeah, maybe threes. He was 2.2 last year, and if he gets he gets a lot more looks, maybe he can knock down some more. Maybe he really focuses on that. And he's always been just a terrific shooter. So I'm not sure why it fell off the cliff last year.
Oklahoma City's offense is atrocious.
Well, that's a good point.
Truly brutal. Okay, well, there you go. That's your pod, ladies and gentlemen. Neil, thank you, my good man.
Oh, thank you, Dan.
It's weird. It went quick. 40-minute podcast. We had things to talk about. It's fun when the NBA gives us news. They really don't take too many breaks, do they?
No, they want to be relevant 365, right?
People are going to start thinking that I'm a riverboat gambler here. I think Brew is rubbing off on me, wanting to take all these injury risks. I should probably dial it back before we get to the start of the season. He's Neil Rochlani. I am Dan Besbris. Neil and Adrian will be back with you on tomorrow's Thursday edition of Fantasy NBA Today. Congratulations to Kevin Love. Made himself a ton of money. Have a wonderful Wednesday. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.